20-year period, teenagers aged 15 to 19 reduced their weekly social hangouts by 45%. And the Atlantic quoted said this: Americans are spending less time with other people because they're spending more time with their screens, televisions, and phones. And so that's a really profound insight, because what it means is a place like the church is going to become more and more important than really ever before, because if we're not having as many social hangouts, where are we going to have that? Where is the third place in culture? And especially for youth ministry, for young adults, that's where the church can step in and say, hey, we're a place for that.
Well, what's up, guys? Hope you're feeling alive right now. I'm Micah Keneally, and welcome to the Young Adults Today podcast, where Josiah and myself are able to co-host some fun things for you as leaders, as you tune in and as you listen. Each and every single Monday, we kick off a new episode, unpacking some hopefully fun, helpful things for you as a leader across the U.S., across the world, and across the different nations. So we love to just create an opportunity for you to say thank you. Would you be willing to subscribe, rate, review? Let us know how we're doing and how we could be doing better. And today we have an incredible guest, one of our dream guests that Josiah's actually been praying for. And I'll let him introduce him. And he is actually in Nashville right now. So we kind of have a three-way convo going. So we're going to have a lot of fun today. So Josiah, how you doing in Nashville?
What's up? What's up, Young Adults Today fam? It's Josiah here, linked together with Micah and our guest, Brady Schearer. Man, welcome to the show. Thanks for saying yes.
Appreciate the invite. Thrilled to be here.
We're so excited. And man, we're going to talk some future of the church, social media, the faith of the next generation. And Brady, I would imagine for most of our listeners and viewers on YouTube, he does not need an introduction. But if you're new or newer to finding out, Brady is the creator of Pro Church Tools, Inc., and the founder of Nucleus, which helps a lot of churches, over 3,000 churches, with web design. He lives on the other side, of the Canadian border in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario, with his wife and two daughters. And man, when I read that about you, we have two daughters, so I'm a proud girl dad. And like we said, man, we're excited. We think the world of the work that you're doing, helping leaders like us, young leaders, navigate changes in culture and communication. And can we kick it to you? And can you share a little bit of your making of the story of how you got to, the past decade of where you're at today?
Yeah, certainly. I went to Bible college to be a youth minister myself. So I have my degree in theology and ministry. And I grew up in a really small Baptist church at the rural Canada, kind of farm country. We had like 18 people that went to church. No PA systems. Like pastor would just preach from this wooden pulpit, just his voice. We had an acoustic guitar, just one, just strumming away, not plugged into anything. But we did have an overhead projector, which was kind of our big piece of tech. So when Days of Elijah would hit the bridge, switch over the translucent film to make sure that we could get the lyrics on the screen. I started going to youth group at this Pentecostal youth group in high school, and that's where faith really became my own thing. And it was so cool. I was like, man, it would be cool to be a pastor one day to help students in the same way that this youth ministry helped me. So my girlfriend and I, we moved across the country, basically the equivalent of moving from, let's say, like Buffalo to Montana. And that's where I got my degree. A couple of years into ministry, I kind of start to realize, like, I don't know if I have the relational bandwidth to be a youth pastor. These kids, they need so much from me, and they deserve that. And I just don't know if, that time spent, it's pretty draining for me. But so I still wanted to work with church. And so I got this internship as the media director at this new church plant. And the pastor kind of puts a camera in my hand and he goes, hey, like, we want to make a vision video for this new church plant. So like, can you just go out and do that? And that was what kind of got me into church communications and the world of digital and tech. And so I started just picking up all these skills on the fly. I make the vision video, and we start working on web design and photography and branding and graphic design and social, of course. And as I go back to class and I look around at the peers that I'm with who are going to become, senior pastors in really small Canadian churches, or youth pastors or worship pastors or young adult pastors, like, man, this is 2010. Like, they're going to get into their job, and then the senior pastor is going to be like, hey, we need a Facebook page. And I was like, man, if I learned that, they're going to have to learn it too. So I start teaching everything that I'm learning. And that was the advent of prochurchtools.com and our podcast, which we've been doing for 10 years, the YouTube channel, which is 10 years old. And I just began blogging and recording video tutorials and podcasting, teaching everything that I was learning. And that was kind of how it began. It was the perfect intersection for me, helping churches. I've only ever wanted to work with and for churches, but also using these skills that made me come alive rather than like drained me emotionally. I'm the type that kind of likes to get in the lab and tinker. I'm really great with people for like a certain window of time. But if I do that every single day, day after day, it's quite draining for me. So I think I would have burnt out if I became a pastor. And running in the lane that God designed me for is pretty special. Special.
I love that. Brady, thank you for sharing parts of your story. And I think it's so fun to hear like how they were put a camera in your hand, you came alive in a different way. And I think you saw a need and you wanted to help meet that need of like how can I teach them what they're going to need to know before they get there essentially, and how can I help prepare the way? And when you're working with youth and you're working with young adults or lead pastors, you're probably seeing a lot of cross-generational things happening. And when it comes to like youth and young adults, and we describe young adults as 18 to 30, but I know some people would say 30 to or 13 to 30. They kind of encompass that as youth ministry, young adult ministry as one of the same. But in reality, we know that's very different seasons of life. But when it comes to maybe like the pastoral hat or the pastoral heart that you still seem to have of wanting to serve the church, when it comes to the next generation, it comes to young adult ministry specifically, why do you believe that young adult ministry is so vital in this day and age? And what have you been able to do to be a part of that through technology and through the teachings of the pastoral rooms that you've been able to be in, whether that's blogging in person, through the things that you've developed? What does that look like for you, and why do you believe it's so important?
I mean, I really only first found like acceptance as a human being in the church. I was very academically inclined growing up,
Mm-hmm.
and I was also very athletic. I remember like graduating 8th grade, I won the Athlete of the Year award, and I won like the highest average award. And like when you kind of like do both, you don't really fit into either group. Uh, like the jocks didn't really want me to hang around. The smart kids didn't really want me to hang around, and so I was kind of just like this eccentric, kid that just didn't fit in anywhere. And then I start like attending church and I show up with all my weirdness and they're like, yeah, man, like you can just like hang out with us and be one of us. And I was like, oh, this is kind of crazy. And
Incredible.
so I think embodying um, that, what the church is meant to be in its essence, at its best. That's why that ministry is so formative, so important during those formative years, whether that be teenage years, but also leading into young adults. The reason I started my company was because the best time of my life to that point had been youth group. And I mentioned I love sports. I also love sitcoms. And so I grew up, and we'd watch Friends and we'd watch Seinfeld and we'd watch, I got a bit older, I'm watching Community, Office comes around, Parks and Rec. And, those aren't real life, but I'd watch those and I'd be like, man, like, isn't it cool? Wouldn't it be cool if like your best friends were also the people that you worked with? I don't know if it's normal, but according to all sitcoms, when you have your first kid, like when you give birth, everyone from work shows up. Like your parents aren't even there. It's just the people from work because they're your friends. And so when I
They
started
got to
this
see the
company,
baby.
yeah, that's right. You got to see the baby. It's right. And we this company starts and it's just me. 14th floor apartment, 1 bedroom. My wife's working in insurance and she's working retail in the evening. She's doing 2 jobs. I'm in school full time. We're newly married, first year. And I'm like, we're gonna start this company, babe. But if it wasn't a company, it was just a blog. So she'd come home and I'd be in my bathrobe and I'd be like, oh yeah, I was working on a WordPress site today. I installed a plugin. And she'd be like, okay, cool. Anyway, I'm gonna eat this like canned tuna, and then I gotta go off to sell shoes at West Edmonton Mall. And when the company, started to take off and it replaced my meager church income and it eventually allowed her to quit both jobs. And, we needed some help. And so who did I call? Called my roommate, who was also one of my closest friends in high school. And then we needed a second employee. So we called another friend from high school, and then a third, and a fourth, and a fifth. And so to this day, our first 7 employees were all my friends from high school. And we all still work together. And now I'm 33 and I have 2 kids. And we all have homes and babies and families. And yet we're still here together. And the reason I draw that is because, the transition from youth ministry to young adult ministry, is not easy for a lot of people.
Mhm.
You leave high school and maybe you have a strong friend group in youth. Maybe you have a strong friend group just in high school. Maybe you leave your house and family home for the first time and you're starting this brand new life. And it can be incredibly isolating and incredibly lonely. And young adult ministry can be one of the best, panaceas for that, where you can find community and you can like find a place to fall back and just be like, okay, there's a lot in my life right now that is incredibly turbulent, but I know that I have this group of people that like me for who I am and will support me as I figure it all out. And so, in terms of value to a person's life during those years, there's just nothing that comes close to that in my estimation.
Remarkable, man. Wow. I just feel similarly. Like you're 33, I'm 32. I remember when we started the podcast, you were much sooner than us, but this is nearing episode 300. So
Wow.
4 years and change. And audio was like the stuff. In fact, I think all of our listeners, everyone was audio, 100%. Like Apple was the major, then Spotify kind of rolled along. And then during the pandemic, we kind of had this idea like, well, YouTube, maybe we could try YouTube. And that about doubled podcast viewership and
Mm.
just video. And then now what I'm seeing in 2024, and it's like not only the audio visitor or listener in the community, there's the video, but then there's short form that can seemingly have an unlimited reach and just share the gospel, the message that God's called us to carry, that He's called you to carry. And it just seems to be a great way to meet people where they're at, right on their tablet or in their workout or on their drive. And it's an honor to do what we get to do. And I want to talk about the power of social media and reaching. But before we do, I came across, I was thinking about this conversation and just praying over it. And I remembered the Great Opportunity Study. Have you heard of this?
I don't think so.
Okay, so Pine Top's Foundation asked two questions like, what could the future of the church, and we'll link it in the show notes, but what could the future of the church in North America and in America, in the US, what could it look like in 2040 and in 2050, the future of the church? And they studied the declining rate of church attendance among boomers and Gen X, and then millennials, which is our generation. And then they predicted some different case studies of how could we best reach Gen Z. So the great opportunity, of course, their first chapter in this study is about planting new churches. And you talked about being a part of a church plant, and it seems like one of the fastest ways to reach people is through 0 to 1. Like there was not a church here, and now there's a church here. But the second thing they came across was they asked this question: where is the digital Martin Luther? Where is the digital George Whitfield, or even the digital Billy Graham? And we just heard a pastor from New York City not just want to put his own sermons on TikTok, but his vision is to employ like 10 interns, volunteers, young adults, so that a teenager could be on a subway in New York City getting saved as they're going to school right on their smartphone. And so I just heard about this idea and read about it really through the Great Opportunity Study, that
Mm.
there is an opportunity that is great and vast. And, Billy Graham went to be with Jesus. And so I just look at the opportunity that the digital landscape has for evangelism and discipleship is, I think, really important. But Brady, you really lead the way as a voice for the cutting edge of church trends and culture, social media strategies. Why is it important for churches and pastors or even leaders to occupy digital spaces with discipleship and evangelism?
So we like to say that we're living through the biggest communication shift in 500 years. That's like our company tagline. I used to get into elevator pitches with people, which is what we call, if someone asks you, what do you do for work? We call it an elevator pitch. The idea is you got to be able to tell them in the speed you can get on and off an elevator. So I'd be like, yeah, church branding and media and communications and social and comps. Cause we all wear multiple hats in ministry. So nobody's really focusing on just one of those things. We kind of have like all these things under one umbrella. And I was like, what? We're helping people navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. And that reference is precisely to what you just said, Josiah. And that is the printing press. The printing press was this massive catalyst in the trajectory of the faith, in the history of the faith. And the reason is that it took the written word of scriptures, and it allowed basically every person to have their own copy of it. It eliminated all these gatekeepers in the faith. And that's what led to the Protestant Reformation and a ton of different things. And,
Totally.
if you go back and you look at a lot of the commentary around then, people weren't especially thrilled with this idea of putting the scriptures into the hands of every person. It's like, hey,
Mhm.
people cannot read the Bible on their own. They cannot be trusted with this. This is not safe. This is a bad idea. This is going to disrupt everything, which of course it did, for certainly the better in a lot of ways. And we're living through a very similar period right now, where we are able to communicate with people in ways that would have been previously unimagined. Um, and so when people ask, like, why do you care about digital media? Why do you care about social? So I don't really care about digital media or social. What I care about is, where are people that we want to reach? And then
Yes.
we should go to those people.
Come on.
And this is something that I think people misunderstand a lot. Like, oh, Brady must love social media. I don't love social media. It's just where everyone is. And I want to reach people, so I go to where all the people are. Pre-social media, if you had a shopping mall in your town, and that shopping mall had one street where, like, that was the hall that every single person in the town walked through. In fact, they walked through it every single day. Like, half the entire town walked through it every single day. And this shopping mall was like, if you want, we could set you up with some prime real estate right in the center there. And you'd be like, wow, how much is this going to cost me? I'm like, no, the rent is free. You can just show up. And you know what? Look, if you have a compelling message to share, people are going to stop and they're going to interact with you. We'd be like, this is amazing. That's what social media is. That's what the internet is. That's the digital media equivalent. And so the simple answer is, like, why do you do this? Well, I think just believe that the Great Commission says to go to where the people are, and it's really more accessible now than it ever has been, which is awesome. You mentioned, like, oh, who might be the next, digital, this person of the faith, this great person of the faith. You know what it also might be is just like all of us contributing in really small ways. It used to be like only like the pastor, or only like the really influential, charismatic leader who would travel around the country and would have like the big tent meetings. Like, you'd go to see them, and that was all you could see. Maybe we're never going to see people like Billy Graham that's that big and influential in the faith, because now we are all able to contribute, and we're all able to kind of like, maybe one Billy Graham, there's like 10,000 of us, and we equal the impact that he had, but we're all pulling in that same direction together.
Totally. I forgot to say this number, but they thought that 1,000 digital Billy Grahams could have the influence that he had back in the day. And so, man, I love what you just said there of, it's the body of Christ. It's Louis Giglio said it so well, that the church isn't built on the talents of a special few, but the sacrifice of many, equipping the saints to do the work of the ministry. So right on with that.
Oh man, I love that. And Brady, I would just be curious to lean into even just like the digital discipleship dynamic. And what do we as leaders and pastors need to know and understand when it comes to Gen Z, when it comes to the alpha generation, of anything from how we create, how we present, how we uncover and unfold like things through our social media posts? Like, how do we reach those people, and what have you seen, or what do we need to be mindful of when it comes to Gen Z and the alpha generation coming up here?
Yeah, I think the most important place to start is knowing the people that you are trying to reach, the people that you're trying to impact. What we know about Gen Z is that they are the least religious generation in American history. They're not really unique in the sense that they are becoming less religious, because every generation in America is becoming less religious. And in many ways, America is starting to look a lot closer to my own country. When I grew up, and still to this day, there's no such thing as cultural Christianity in Canada or Australia or the UK. Most Western countries, what we have are people that are committed to Christ, and there's a smaller group of that relative to the larger group in America. But what you could say is that that smaller group in other Western nations is more committed, because cultural Christianity just doesn't exist. Well, now we're starting to see a shift, and we have seen a shift in that in America. Something that might be interesting. I just got this email from one of my favorite sources of data and religion, Ryan Burge, this morning, and he said that the nuns have hit a ceiling. And basically, what that means is that we saw this increase of people that would say, yeah, I don't have any faith affiliation. That would mean you're either atheist, you're agnostic, you're nothing in particular. That's kind of like the three categories that make up what we would call a nun. And it's kind of plateaued. It got basically to like a third of the population, and it grew pretty dramatically. In 2008, it was about a fifth of the population. And then up to 2020, it grew to a third of the population. And it's kind of just like stayed there. And so that's kind of interesting that we might be kind of hitting a plateau in that sense, and what that might mean for the next decade. You talked about 2040, 2050. If we have hit that plateau, I think the assumption is that, oh, we just be, soon it's going to be half of the country that's a nun, or 75%. Well, maybe not. Maybe it sticks around at a third. What does that mean? So least generation in American history. What's interesting is that beliefs can differ from involvement. So just because Gen Z doesn't necessarily have the strongest belief in religion, they are more active. The least active generation religiously is actually Gen X. Poor Gen X, they often get looked over. We're not looking over them now. Now we've got the laser on them, which is unfortunate, I suppose. What we also know about Gen Z is that they are more likely than other generations to report having a mental health condition. Almost 3 in 10 say that they're prone to anxiety.
Mm,
That's from the Global Web Index. So that's not American specific, that's global.
mm,
And I think there's a lot of different contributing factors. Social, for sure, plays a factor. Um, I think that we're all coming to terms with the other side of the sword of social media and digital media. Now that we've had 10 to 15 years of it, Facebook became public in 2008 for most people to register. So we're like, social's a 16-year-old. I don't know. I remember myself as 16, like, yeah, I could do some good. I could do some damage. And we're kind of in that same adolescent, awkward place with social where we've got enough data now to be like, hey, maybe we need to like be mindful of our use of this. Whereas like when it first came out, we were all just like, oh, cool, a top 8 on MySpace. This isn't toxic whatsoever. I'll tell you you're my third most important friend. So social plays a role in their mental health concerns. Another thing that doctors are starting to notice, though, is something called prevalence inflation. I don't know if you've heard about this. This is from the journal New Ideas in Psychology. And they talked about, okay, the good, the bad, and the ugly of mental health awareness efforts. So the good is that, we've seen this huge rise in mental health awareness efforts. That's leading to more accurate reporting of previously under-recognized symptoms. Okay, previous generations, there was like that stereotype of the dad who just like, couldn't access his feelings. Okay, like we've made progress there. That's the good. The bad is that these awareness efforts are actually leading some people to interpret and report just mild forms of distress as mental health problems. So it's like, oh, life's difficult. It's a mental health issue. It's like, no, like that's just like life's difficulties and challenges. So that's the bad. And then the ugly, and this is really interesting and scary, is that this hyper awareness actually leads some individuals to experience a genuine increase in symptoms, because when you label distress as a mental health problem, it can actually affect the way that you see yourself to the point that it actually becomes self-fulfilling. And so speaking to digital discipleship, I mean, this is one specific area that I think that the church is equipped to speak to specifically. We talk about in social media content that we create, the intersection of faith and culture. Where do the needs of someone who has no faith background whatsoever intersect with the wisdom of Scripture and what being in a relationship with Jesus is meant to be? And understanding your identity in Christ, understanding that you are made in the image of God, understanding that you are meant to exist in a community of people that support you and are rallying around a shared vision of following Jesus, irrespective of socioeconomic status or ethnicity or gender or background. It's about Jesus. Those types of things can be incredibly therapeutic and healing to something like these mental health issues. We know that the human condition needs other people. We know that from Scripture. The American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine, so secular sources also agree. This is a quote from that journal. Social connection is a pillar of lifestyle medicine. Humans are wired to connect, and this connection affects our health. One more data point, and I'll stop yapping.
Bring it, man. This is gold.
So there was this article in The Atlantic. It was called Why Americans Suddenly Stopped Hanging Out. And it plotted from 2003. So I was 12. So I'm just becoming a teenager. 2003, Josiah, you would have been 11, or if you're a 91 baby, 12 as well. So 2003 from 2022 to 2022. So a 20-year period. Teenagers aged 15 to 19 reduced their weekly social hangouts by 45%. And the Atlantic quoted said this: Americans are spending less time with other people because they're spending more time with their screens, televisions, and phones. And so that's a really profound insight, because what it means is a place like the church is going to become more and more important than really ever before. Because if we're not having as many social hangouts, where are we going to have that? Where is the third place in culture? And especially for youth ministry, for young adults, that's where the church can step in and say, hey, we're a place for that. Doesn't matter your background, doesn't matter how much money your family has, doesn't matter your ethnicity, doesn't matter. Hey, come here and we can all rally around this shared purpose. And then as we consider how that impacts how we approach digital media as churches, it means that our online efforts are meant to support what's happening in person. This is another misunderstanding that folks have about me often, is like, oh, he just wants to have church on the internet. It's like, no, I don't believe that at all. In person and online are meant to work together. They do very different things. When we use online to promote in person and they work harmoniously, that's when we can see really transformative efforts from our churches.
Oh my goodness. And I think that, man, I know in the US, our experience has been that there's just been such a rise in content, and we're a global generation. We're all kind of using the same size screens and devices across the globe, and then accessing a lot of the same information and web and apps and portals real time. And even right now, I'm still blown away. I'm traveling. I'm in Nashville. Micah is at our home in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I'm in Tennessee. Mike is in Minnesota, and Brady's linking together with us from Canada. So we've got at least different countries. And I think this podcast has listeners and viewers from around 67 different countries. And so there's definite things, but there's been such a surge in availability and access of content. And to your point there with the Atlantic discovering just this drop off of community and the pandemic, and a few years back with COVID, there is still just never been more access to content, and people have never been more experiencing touch starvation, community, friendship, just dying, waiting their whole life to have somebody that they can call a friend. And let me ask you this. It's a little bit off script, but Dr. Tim Elmore, he was a guest on this show, and he told us about the cell phone and the iPhone. And he said, man, when our phones had leashes, we were free. But now that our phones are free, we kind of have these leashes. Being that you lean so heavily into some of the content spaces, and we're with you, man. I just think that there is such an evangelistic, discipleship, forward thinking, future church opportunity there that pairs really well with community. But what do you have any personal boundaries that you'd be willing to share with me as a girl dad, or that you'd be willing to share with the listener, of maybe they're leading a young adult ministry and helping with their church's web design, social, and online church as well? Like, what are some of the things that you put in place to make more noise with maybe the same or even less amount of time? How do you deal with um, not being a digitally distracted dad?
So I do a couple of things. The first is that, and you know what, actually, what I should say is I kind of hit like this critical point this year where my audience had grown to a certain point where my previous systems weren't working anymore. And it's funny, when I was first starting the business, I read this book called The E-Myth Revisited. And it was this really transformative book for me, because it basically just like detailed, hey, there are things that you should do and things that maybe other people should do. And I was like, wow, profound. Changed my life forever. And my business will be officially 10 years old in 11 days. We celebrate 10 years incorporated. It was just me beforehand for a couple of years, but
Congrats.
10 years officially incorporated.
Wow.
I appreciate it. May 31st, 2024. So
Go.
it's been 10 years. And I basically have found that I need to learn this lesson again. So I started reading this new book. It's called Buy Back Your Time. It's the identical book. It is the exact same book. But I needed to hear it again. And what I've begun doing is we did a little bit more hiring this past month to basically put people into positions where, like, over time, I just started to do things. And so, like, my biggest answer is I am very, very protective of my time. And one of the things that I found that was not effective for me was like time limits, apps that like automatically close out at certain times. Like, I haven't found it to be tremendously useful to like leave the phone like on the other side of the room. Those things I think work for people. They didn't work for me. And One of those reasons is probably because like my team's like 30 people at this point, and sometimes they need me, and then I have to like respond. So what we did was, at first it was just me leading like 10 people, and this is probably not going to be a great answer because like this is very specific to me, and people are like, okay, I'm not leading a team of 30, Brady. Hopefully those two books will be useful, and I'll get to some other useful tips in a second that are useful for everyone. But for me, I was leading like 12 people, and it was fine. But then like we grew to 20 and 30. And like it was one with me at the top to like all 30 people. And that was just too many. So what we had to do was like raise up some kind of like intermediate leaders where it was like me, and then I managed the leaders, and then the leaders managed like the rest of the team. And so that was like very useful at kind of like resetting the amount of time. Because for me, I wasn't having an issue with like spending too much time scrolling on feeds and stuff. I was having an issue with too many like notifications and people needing me, emails, texts, professionals that I work with, the sales things, whatever is coming. So that was what was most useful for me. And there's one other element to this equation, and I call it my habits of joy spreadsheet. And my habits of joy spreadsheet is not about what I shouldn't be doing, it's about what I should be doing. And for at least for me, that was a really useful shift of mindset. So my habits of joy spreadsheet covers a lot of things. It covers in great detail the food and liquid that I intake every single day. I am really, I think, more than most people, sensitive to food. And so like if I eat poorly, I become incredibly sluggish, I become incredibly ineffective. And you know who ends up paying for that most of the time? It's the wife and the kids. They're the ones that at the end of the day, I don't have the energy for, I don't have the attention span for, and I don't have like any bandwidth left for them if I'm not eating right. It tracks going on daily walks. It tracks prayer habits. It tracks, things that are really granular, like fiber and saturated fat intake. It tracks meditation. It tracks sleep, of course. And what I found is when those things are dialed, when I prioritize those things, everything else falls into place. And it's when those things start to slip that things become more challenging. So the big shift for me wasn't like I have to stop doing X, Y, and Z. It's that I have to start doing X, Y, and Z. And once those things were cemented, the other things kind of like fell into place. Until, of course, then all these people started, my notifications blew up too much, and then we had to hire again. And that's why I read that book again.
I love it. I think a lot of our listeners can relate to just discovering that they need more organizational implementation when it comes to growth, whether it's somebody leading a church, somebody being on campus, somebody leaving or leading an organization on any front, realizing that the systems and structures that we have in place, do they have the ability to grow with us, or are we ahead of them? And I think even as Josiah and I lead a nonprofit, there's only two of us and we are doing everything. And we're just coming off a camp weekend where 175 young adults gather, and there's four of us that plan the event, two outside volunteers, and then Josiah and myself. And it's like, we can't be everything to everyone 24/7, whether we're on the camp, whether we're online, whether we're planning, like the system that we have, we need to grow it, and we need to think bigger. We need to dream bigger. We need to have those in place. So when the people do come, or if God decides to explode this beyond our imaginations, do we have it in an orderly fashion that we're not going to crumble underneath, the people, the pressure demands, or the desires of what people want when it comes to church, community, and just an opportunity to come together. And one thing that we've really realized with this next generation coming up, and even pastors listening, that can kind of, I don't know, it can do one of two things. I think it can comfort and bring some excitement in the church place, or it can like disrupt the norms where it ruffles a lot of feathers. And that's AI. When it comes to sermon prep, when it comes to assignments, if you're like a professor or you're on a college campus and you're working with students, plagiarism, all these things are coming into place. And these people that we've talked to, whether they're 50, 60, 70 years old, still in some form of ministry, or they're 15, 16, 17 years old coming to us saying, hey, when I do a project, I run it through this AI program to shuffle things around under here. And then I get to the third part where it writes it for me and my teachers can't trace it. So I didn't actually write my assignment and do it. And these are like young men and women who are Christians having homework done for them, essentially, when it comes to AI. So it kind of brings forth this moral dilemma in some of the pastors' hearts of, hey, I want to cut corners and I want to honor God and I want to save time and not be on social media, and I need some assistance. And we don't have the encyclopedias. We don't have the thesaurus in front of us. We're not going to the Bible and looking at the bibliographies and breakdowns. So when it comes to maybe an ethical dilemma in some that might abuse it or some might utilize it, what have you found, or maybe more or less, what is your philosophy on AI, and how would you encourage the pastor who's very skeptical of it? And how would you challenge the pastor who's like, I'm all about this. I never have to write another message ever again. Like, what is your philosophy on AI, more or less?
Yeah, for sure. So when these types of things come up, I often encourage churches to implement policy. What policy does is it gives us shared language to talk about tricky things, and it also gives us a shared target. A lot of the times, interpersonal conflict, whether that's within yourself or with other folks in ministry, comes down to you don't have kind of the same destination in mind. Personal preference begins to take the place of what should be mission. And so policy is meant to be that shared language, that anchor, so that we can have conversations about what's going to help us fulfill the mission the best without compromise, rather than, okay, this is what I really like, and I want to do this thing because I really like it. So in terms of AI policy, we're working with a really simple policy here. It's just two parameters. The first parameter is, why are we using AI? And I think we'll evolve to maybe this doesn't become part of the policy in 10 years, but because this is so new and so bizarre in the human experience, it's where we start. Why are we using AI? And to use some of the language that Micah used, AI can be a useful shortcut. So that's parameter number one. Why are we using AI? AI can be a useful shortcut. And then parameter number two is, what are our boundaries for AI? And the answer is, we will not use AI as our exclusive source. So let's take those pair of parameters and apply it to two different ministry examples. So the first would be, we want to write a description for the About Us page on the church website. Okay, you are put in charge of redesigning the website or rewriting the About Us page. You got a million other things to do, and you're like, man, AI could do this a lot faster than I could. So you go about the following. You input a sentence about your church into the AI generator. The AI generator expounds on that sentence you gave it to write an entire paragraph. Then you proofread that paragraph to make sure it's accurate. For me, that passes our policy. The original source was the sentence that you gave it, and you're proofreading it as a final test before putting it up. Great. You put in one sentence, it gave you two paragraphs. That was quick. Very nice. Example number two, sermon research. You ask the AI what the book of James says about mercy. And you ask the AI, provide citations for this. The AI follows your instructions. You don't double check the sources. You go forward. This fails our policy. The reason why this is important is because AI is actually known to lie. There is a very famous example of this. I believe it was in California with a lawyer who went and looked up, studying his case. Oh, previous, how does this interpret it? And it was like, look, judge, pleaded it in front of the judge, argued it in front of the judge. In a previous case, Jim versus, Smith in 1993, the law proved X, Y, and Z. And then the other side was like, wait a minute, we didn't see any of this evidence. And they looked it up. Never happened. The AI just completely invented it. You can find this. It was in the New York Times, not some obscure like wives' tale story. And so that's why using AI as the original source for anything is just like off the table, cannot be done. We cannot trust the robots. So I love using AI, but never for like writing original things. Like every single thing on my social, every single, it's like, I don't like offloading that creativity. I love using AI in annoying creative tasks. So for instance, you're doing some church photography. Lightroom now has amazing AI noise removal, where before you could just go noise removal, 0% to 100%. Now it can intelligently identify what type of noise is in the photograph and remove it. That's amazing because church
awesome.
photography is challenging. The lighting is often awful and we don't have amazing camera gear. And so what do we get? Oh, that's a really dark, grainy image. Intelligent noise removal, amazing. I love AI for things like that. Transcription. Oh, there was this famous, in my company, famous thing we did where we had a podcast and we were moving website platforms. And I was like, guys, SEO is going to be huge. We need to transcribe every podcast. And so all 8 of them did it by hand. It was 2 weeks long. And then they were like, we're all going to quit if you make us do this. And I was like, all right, you're right. We can't do this. It's unrealistic. I was a young leader. I guess I didn't consider the emotional burden of something so awful. Anyway, that could be done in like an afternoon with AI now. But 5 years ago, it was like, well, we got to do it by hand or we got to pay rev.com $2 a minute Canadian to make it done. So that's another amazing reason for AI to, work in our lives. So using that policy should be helpful. It's pretty rough. It's pretty minimal. It's just meant to give us that shared language and have us all asking smarter questions, because obviously this tech is tremendously useful and tremendously unnerving at the same time.
Man, Brady, it's phenomenal because to contextualize it for Micah and I, like she mentioned, we lead young adults today. It's a nonprofit. We were like 2 years old as of this June, and the podcast has been going longer. It became a leader conference. We did some camps for young adults that really took off, and we were like, wow, with this small amount of time, this is how much impact God's had. What if He could have both of us full time at doing this? And it's been a fun journey. And she already outlined, like, I think we're maybe if you can imagine your journey 8 years ago, like, oh, there's growing pains and we're doing a lot that maybe is outside of some of our skill set, but we have 2 weekly podcasts. One, Young Adults Today, is for leaders and churches and pastors. FYI, we unpack the question of a young adult that they send in every Friday. And so questions about faith, life, theology, finances, relationships, sex, any of that. And just asking the question, like, what does God's word say about this? And what we noticed is when we launched that podcast, episode number one, overnight had like 7,000 some audio views or audio plays. And that was like, oh my gosh, we hit a nerve. What does a healthy Christian relationship look like? And then anytime on FYI that we talk about love, sex, dating, waiting, relationships, marriage, singleness, dating, it's just like it strikes a nerve with the 18 to 30-year-old. And an idea that I had is we actually have an audio AI tool that we've only tried once. But I was like, man, we've already written these episodes. We've already answered the questions. It's in there on our computer archive. And man, what a great tool that repurposing some of that same content on purpose could be, because it's Micah and I's research. What does God's word say? And some of the teaching. And I remember, like, in the day, pro church tools being a blog or having a blog, and people used to go to your blog on your website and read it. And now it's like the carousel Instagram post. But I didn't use AI for this. I just experimented at the beginning of the year, turning some of last year's blog posts into carousel posts on Instagram. And they are so shareable. And for us, to borrow some language that I've heard you use, they were viral for us. They really got shared and transported a lot all over the place. But what I want to pick your brain selfishly on is give us some YouTube and podcast specific insight on how to share the message that God's given us, and take things to the next level. I know I heard you on Carey Nieuwhof unpack early in 2024 in that, future trend series. You were sharing with him about like no weeks off and finding clips that are viral for you. So we're what is it, May? As we record this, we're 5 months into that journey, and it's been fun and encouraging and rewarding. But for us, and maybe for the listener who might be helping their pastor put their sermons on YouTube or do viral for them clips, no weeks off, help us go to the next level.
So YouTube is a search engine, second largest search engine in the world, and it's owned by the largest search engine in the world. For now, who knows? OpenAI is coming, but for now. And that means that, for most people, they use YouTube to get answers. I was preparing what we call a Sunday supper, where our pastor and friends come over and we have Sunday supper at my house. So I was looking forward to our next one beginning of June. And I was like, man, I really like a salad. It's summertime, a nice bright salad. So I go to YouTube and I type in summer salad, and a bunch of answers come up, and the best ones are ranked higher. And so I go there, and that's the one with 1.2 million views or 132,000 views or 36,000 views. And go, that's the best one. And YouTube is confident based on how people have reacted and watched through that, based on watch time and interaction signals, that is a good answer to my question. The other way that people are using YouTube is not just for content, but for community. And this is like an interesting shift that we're seeing. And this is also what is useful to remember about social media, is that it is an adolescent. And if you think about an adolescent, how much they change and how quickly they change, because they're still trying to like figure things out. And social's much the same way right now. YouTube for a long time was dominated by, the Mr. Beastification of the platform, where, everything was highly sensationalized. If you think about thumbnails, like really outlandish facial expressions and bright colors, to the point where AIs were actually like super smoothing people's faces and introducing unnatural coloring because it was so crazy that your eyes were drawn to it. Click-through rates went up, people gamed the system, and then this entire trend followed. And then what we saw is, like we see with every single thing, whether it be music or fashion, or in this case, the design of social media, we saw a swing to the other side of the spectrum and purposefully making things not look like they were meant for YouTube in an effort to actually get people to click on them and to prove that this video was trustworthy. Because we start, if you see something too much, you start to become a little bit skeptical of it. You're like, did you really need to make a face that was that stretched just to get my attention? You might not be someone that's worth trusting. Then you come across another YouTube thumbnail, and it's just like this still of a person like in their messy office, just like with a blank expression on the camera, terrible color grading. And then the title of the video is like all lowercase, like what to do when you're stuck. It's like 9 million views because people click on it because they're like, I don't know what this is, but this clearly is someone
Wow.
I could trust because they're not trying hard at all. And they're
Wow.
not trying hard. That must mean it's useful. And that's just like the funny thing about marketers. Is a great line. I don't know who came up with it. Maybe Seth Godin. It was like, marketers ruin everything. And that's the truth. Anytime a marketer like myself will identify that, hey, this works, we will run it into the ground to the point that it doesn't work anymore. And then we have to find a new way to storytell in a way that will work. And the audience at all times is just trying to be like, I know you're trying to sell me something. I know you're trying to get my attention. I'm not going to let you. And it's just an endless game of cat and mouse. And so YouTube right now is kind of going through a bit of an evolution because people are searching for answers to their questions, but people are now also watching videos, whether they be vlogs or families, this kind of serialized type of content where you're just following someone's journey. And we're in the middle right now of evaluating our own approach to YouTube. We've been on the platform for 10 years. We've got more than 600, 700 videos. But at this point, we've also answered a lot of the questions that you can answer. And we have a YouTube channel for our podcast as well. So now we have two channels. They're kind of, overlapping in terms of the content. So we're right now in pre-production on like a new YouTube series where, okay, how can we like show more of the company and do teaching, but also bring people into like, hey, we're just all friends that have been friends for 10 years. Like, I think people would enjoy kind of like seeing our journey as we try to like achieve things in our own company. And so that's one of the things that we're evaluating right now. And the reason I mentioned that is just to say like, hey, we don't have all the answers. Sometimes things change in social. Right now, our carousel posts that you mentioned are completely going off. I don't know how long it can happen. Those carousels that we've been doing for like more than a year now, they aren't slowing down. I do the exact same design over and over again, and it just works and works and works. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing this. People seem to enjoy it until eventually people are like, I've had enough of this design, and I'll have to reevaluate and come up with something fresh. The content's always the same. I'm just finding new ways to storytell. So hopefully there's something in that rant that was remotely valuable, because YouTube is such a beast, and right now we're in a bit of a lull ourselves that we're trying to navigate.
Oh
Well,
man.
man, not sure if it's worth anything, but I mean, we've followed you for years. I checked a note. I searched your name in my iPhones. The first note that I came across was your name in 2017. It's something that I had read on a blog. So we've been tracking with your journey for a while, but in this season of the ministry that God's put in our hands, I listened really carefully when you started talking about the growing pains that you experienced and going from one to a few to 10, and then leading 10 is way different than 30. And so, man, I would just say, right on. I'll be eagerly anticipating the drop date of that series. That's cool.
Yeah, and I just love your transparency, even with our audience today, of saying like, hey, like we don't have all the answers. Here's where we're at. Here's what we're hoping for. And it just shows that you understand that the sky's the limit when it comes to creativity and content. And when we invite God into that process, I feel like he's gonna make a way where there seems to be no way. He's gonna get the information out to the people who need to hear it, who need to see it, who need to experience it. And I know that we're not YouTube, but we want to get some answers from you, Brady. Are you ready for the 5 and 5 challenge?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the 5 and 5, we're gonna have 5 minutes on the clock, and we're gonna have 5 questions. And the first question is, what would you have told yourself 10 years ago starting your journey?
So I actually have it written on the wall, and this was quite timely because it'll be 10 years and 11 days. I have this quote that I have on my chalkboard wall right beside me, and it says, "Most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years." I used to set pretty lofty goals for myself in 12-month intervals, and when I didn't accomplish them, I'd like interpret that as an indictment on my ability. And then when I did like deeper, more sober reflection, I could see that if I had just expanded that time horizon, I was like, oh wow, what I've accomplished here is pretty amazing. Like we have 109,000 people that follow us on Instagram. 109,000. It's been a very slow growth process over 10 years. There was never like one huge spike. That's just showing up every day, small efforts every day, compound interest.
So good.
Beautiful. I mean, let us into your mind for 60 seconds. What are you excited about and learning in 2024 real time?
Yeah, so like I'm so deep into cooking right now. I'm not really like a do anything with your hands type person. Like I can't fix a car. I drive a Tesla, it never breaks, thank the Lord. I can't like build anything. I did carpentry for like one summer, and so I have like very basic skills. My wife's the one that like breaks out the saw, and then I'm in there like working on a sourdough starter and making sure the rise time in my fermentation station is like dialed. So we've kind of like swapped gender roles there. I am the primary breadwinner and bread baker in this family. I've just found a lot of joy in making meals for the family. I'm gonna get off this call and start prepping some kung pao chicken for this evening. It's also very therapeutic for me. It's not on a screen. It is working with my hands, but it's also still art, and it engages that same part of my brain. But it's not monetized. I don't have to worry about business. I'm just like having fun with it.
I love that. I was giggling on this side because I actually am the one that'll bust out the tools too and in the kitchen. So Josiah is more like, I'll mow the lawn and make sure it looks awesome. So you guys are like girl dads and can relate to like Josiah. I don't want to speak for you, but he's not like the most enthusiastic about the handy things that need to be done. Our daughters go, should we just call someone? And they're 2 and
Yeah,
4. So it's really
you
funny.
really
I was like,
should.
yeah, something's going on. Should we just call someone?
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, it's too funny. Well, here's the curveball of the 5 and 5 home run derby we have going here, Brady. If you could ask Josiah and myself any question, what would you want to know today?
Well, I mean, I always love to know about how, couples first met. I don't know how fast you can distill that in a 5 and 5. I got the timer over here at 2 minutes, 35 seconds. So, go
He's
quick, I
literal.
guess.
Okay, go ahead, Josiah. You
Go
go
ahead,
first.
go.
Oh, well, okay.
Well,
How we
Micah
met?
had a vision. Micah had a dream.
Yes. So 2014, I had a dream and vision. I said, God, I want to see his face when I go to bed tonight. I did see a face. I didn't know who it was. I moved to Minneapolis from North Dakota in the fall of 2014 to go back to school. I met Josiah and I shook his hand the first church service I ever went to here in the Minneapolis area. And God, it was the guy for my dream. And God said, yep. And the dream and the vision that I'd never stepped foot in was actually a Stone Arch Bridge that you've been a part of and been on. That was the dream that I had, and I journaled about it.
Wow.
And so when I met Josiah, I did two things. One, I prayed for my future spouse, not that he would become my future spouse. So I prayed for my future spouse and I prayed for Josiah. And I said, God, if these two lanes ever connect, that's completely up to him and up to you. I will remain obedient and I'll walk in cadence with you, but I cannot have a Joseph moment and share this dream or vision with anybody because what happened to him, his brother sold him and look where he ended up. And I did not want to lose a dream that I've been praying for 3.5 years and fasting for in that process. So when we met, there's an obedient factor that Josiah had to come in on. And then he saw my heart on a mission trip, if you want to pick up there, Josiah, of 2015, when we went to China together with a group of young adults.
It was amazing. I was the young adult pastor at a church in Minneapolis, and I had a rule. I don't date women from this church. But Micah moved from out of state in North Dakota, a neighbor to all of us. You got North Dakota, Minnesota, Canada, eh? And so I was able to not break my own rule. And it wasn't the church's rule or God's rule. It was just I didn't want people to have to worry if the
Yeah.
church was a safe place for them or not. And man, I did see Micah's heart on that missions trip, came back, went to a U2 concert, had a moment of prayer with God, and I mean, the rest is history.
Funny.
But Brady, I mean, back to you. How about this one? A quick one. What's one place that you haven't been that you'd want to travel?
Yeah, I'm like obsessed with Scandinavia right now. Like all my favorite clothing brands are like Danish and Swedish. But also like Scandinavia is like if Canada went even like more Canada. And so I really want to go there. I've got a trip set for September, Denmark, Sweden, Oslo, pardon me, Norway. So I'm really excited for that.
That is awesome. Okay, the fifth and final question. Don't mind the clock. It's okay if we go over 5 minutes. If you could leave the listener with one piece of encouragement today, what would you want to encourage them with?
I think it's that same answer to the first question, because it's what I encourage myself with when I feel down. Here's a good visual example of that. If you imagine there's two bowling balls and there's two ramps in front of the bowling balls. They're right next to each other. One of the ramps is a flat downward ramp, nice and smooth downward trajectory. The other one is this really bumpy one. Think about like these, like a skateboard half pipe. It's like that over and over again, like this giant wave. So the bowling ball goes up and down, up and down. One is more smooth than the other. If you, and this is true to physics, start those bowling balls at the same time, the one that goes through the ups and downs will get to its destination faster. And that's because the downward is actually what propels the upward. And so this is why seasons are so crucial, and why, the toughest parts of life, in hindsight, we almost always say, you know what, if I could, I wouldn't change any part of it, because where would you be today without it? It's really easy to remember that when you're on the upward and you're like, yeah, I'm going to remember this next time when things are challenging. If you're in the challenging moment, just remember that like it's just a blip, and it is the lessons and the stamina and the fortitude that gets built during this challenging season that what's going to propel you to the next.
Awesome.
Oh my God. Man, a lot of things have spoken to me. It's been timely. Congrats on 10 years, but what you just said to close, Brady, thanks for going there. I think launching anything, a ministry, a volunteer role, a business, a nonprofit, it can be so emotional, like a roller coaster. And man, that just reminds me to not get off the ride.
That's right.
And so thanks for that, my friend. You're listening to the Young Adults Today podcast.